On today's episode, we're sitting down with Joe Bast, the VP of People at Crisp, which is a Series B startup in the data analytics space. And Joe has over 15 years of experience scaling startups from 50 to hundreds of people. In this conversation, we're diving deep into the impact of AI on the workplace, from the disappearance of entry level roles and threat on senior level roles in the future, and the intentional need for coaching and management to fill that gap that AI is now creating, as well as training grounds that need to be designed for entry level roles. It's a really interesting conversation. So let's get into it. To kick us off, I was wondering if you could kind of just tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Crisp and how it connects to the larger topic of conversation we're going to be having today.
Yeah. So my name's Joe Bast. I'm the VP of People at a Series B startup called Crisp. We're about 300 employees spread throughout the United States, Canada, and the UK. The space we're in, we are data analytics. So we help suppliers move their inventory and connect with their distributors all in one common collaborative platform. I've been here for about a year and a half. But I've been leading startup HR for the last 15 years. So in general, coming into a company when they're 50 or 60 people and growing them until they're several hundred, putting all the processes and experiences in place for employees. And a lot of that has to do with learning as well. By training, I'm an industrial psychologist. So a bit of a weird background for this role, but I found that, the more I learned about organizations and psychology, the more it felt like a natural fit to lead people teams.
That's exciting. And really quick before we jump into the heavier stuff, when you joined Crisp, what problem were you most excited about helping solve?
Oh, the funny thing is, I was brought in to kind of build out the HR function. And when I arrived, I fully expected that there would be, processes that were broken or not well documented, or, things would be really, really messy. And that just wasn't the case. They had one HR type person who had been documenting all the processes. And so it was a pretty impressive set of things that had been created. The problem was they were all manual. And so I think one of the first things I looked forward to was, how are we able to do these same things in an automated way that's repeatable? It doesn't take, an extra set of eyeballs or extra pair of hands to do. And for our first 6 or 7 months, we spent most of that time automating those HR processes.
Oh, so it seems like AI is really taking a lot of the work off people's hands.
It
And
is.
given that it's removing a lot of the grunt work that people used to cut their teeth on, how do you see that impacting and senior level positions down the line?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like this is the exact center of the target on this conversation, which is, AI provides this great productivity lift. It helps people who are already good at their jobs get a lot more done and a lot more quickly. But at the same time, it's automating so much of the entry level work that those entry level jobs are starting to disappear. And so for me, the question about my workforce that kind of keeps me up at night is, how am I going to get a senior whatever in 5 years? So how am I going to get a senior engineer in 5 years? How am I going to get a senior recruiter in 5 years? Because the people who are joining the workforce won't have those jobs available. And so I think it affects every profession. It affects every function. And I think we need to figure out as an industry, especially as companies want and need senior talent, how are we going to ensure that's available when those frontline jobs aren't?
Right. Have you seen any direct examples yourself of where this is starting to manifest?
Oh, absolutely. So we've been experimenting for a couple quarters with some AI outbounding for our hiring roles. So the
Mm.
idea is that an outbounding recruiter or screening recruiter sends emails, they get replied to and scheduled, and we do screening interviews. We've automated most of that front end of the process, which is fantastic. But I have two senior recruiters right now who, because they spent the last several years learning and recruiting, they can look at what's been sorted, they can look at what's been gathered and make decisions about which candidates to move forward or backward. But they learned that over several years of experience. And
Right.
so, when they've moved on and I still need a senior recruiter, how will someone have developed those skills if they didn't have that entry level job?
So, do you think then that companies will sort of need to re-engineer the training grounds for these types of positions because it's
One
not
hundred,
inherently available?
yeah, 100%. And when you and I talked about this earlier, it's always been important to have a manager who's a good coach for lots of reasons. Career development, motivation, inspiration, all those things. But in an environment where there are fewer frontline jobs and there are fewer people doing them, all of our apples are kind of in the basket of that person learning how to become a senior expert in their field. And so I think managers being more intentional about coaching, more focused on the things that you're trying to help people learn because you're going to learn a lot more quickly. But more than ever, we need managers who can coach.
So then what's the risk if we skip that foundation? What does it mean for the long-term talent pipeline?
Yeah. Um, I really think the biggest question is, people are going to get their expertise along the way. Depending, it may change how long it takes. The sources may change, but they'll get there. I think the question becomes: can people learn quickly enough so that we can fill the more senior roles that we need to fill? Without
Mhm.
going back to the very basic processes. Because if there's a skills gap, the whole industry is going to sink. And it also, I think, will be impacted by how quickly AI continues to develop. There's a couple steps away from AGI. Once AGI is here, then what is the role of the human? How do we train people to have skills in a world where most skills can be done more quickly by a computer? The trades are safe. If you have an inkling that you like to fix things, you want to be a plumber or an electrician, the trades are booming. AI is not going to replace the jobs anytime soon. They use an apprenticeship model, which is another sustainable way to learn. So, but there are lots of good options, but the world will definitely be different in a couple of years.
So you mentioned managers taking a lot of intentional action in teaching. How do you see, like, what specifically would you say needs to happen in that gap where the entry level positions aren't exactly going to be teaching people anymore? How do we fill that in a very direct way?
Yeah. So I think it means being very intentional about what the people that you're developing need to learn and how quickly they need to learn it. So I'll give you an example. I have a people operations specialist on my team who, when we went through different disciplines of HR after she joined, she indicated there were 3 or 4 of them that she wanted to become a little more expert in. And that's great because I think there's lots of opportunities to learn some of these things on the job. And so rather than just, going through a normal project management cycle or a normal process and giving her feedback about her strengths or her weaknesses along the way, I'd be handing assignments to her that involved things like employee relations and a benefits issue. And then she would try to figure out how to do that thing. And if she needed help, she would ask. And so instead of, just trying to figure out, oh, she needs to learn about learning and development. She needs to learn about compensation. It's these real world assignments in small enough pieces that she can start to practice along the way.
Right. Now I'm curious, like, I'm also thinking education wise, if school is the prerequisite for the work people are doing, how does that play into this? Like, tools are always evolving, so obviously
Yeah.
curriculums can't keep up with. You can't just teach an AI tool because it'll be extinct in a few months, maybe. Who knows? And like,
Yeah.
I'm curious what your perspective is on how education will keep up with everything.
Well, I hope education will kind of find a renaissance. A few years ago, we were teaching people broadly how to solve problems, how to, do big math, how to, write, and do science at a particular level of rigor. Um, but lately, it seems like institutions aren't measuring that type of output. And so we have to rely on what people do on the job to be better estimates of what they can do. I think that will continue. I would love to say the universities are going to be great at providing us with people who can think critically and who can solve very complex problems. Um, but it's going to be very hard to measure. And so I think, what universities can do is commit to teaching students not just the expertise subject matter, such as biology, but to put it along things like logic or philosophy. People who can think critically about an expertise are going to be very valuable in the future. People who can't think critically are going to very quickly be overrun by other people who are doing their jobs with the same AI.
It's gonna be really interesting to see how things unfold. I'm a little bit anxious and scared and also excited. I don't know. It's gonna be a crazy next decade. I have no idea what to expect.
Well, and every time a new technologies come around, whether it was cars replacing horse-drawn carriages in the early 1900s, or whether it was mobile phones replacing desktop computers or laptops. And we always fear that there's going to be such job loss and the masses aren't going to be able to work. But what always happens is things tend to pivot and new jobs get created by the new technology. And, the people shift at what we're learning how to do. We adapt. It's probably,
Mhm.
if I was taking one thing that, makes kind of humans the killer app, as it were, is our ability to adapt, both
Yeah.
individually and as a group.
I was also curious on the topic of AI, since you guys at Crisp leverage AI, could you talk a little bit about how you guys are taking advantage of AI in your industry?
Yeah, there's a number of different ways. Like when we think about our industry from a product perspective, we have this collaborative commerce platform that has trillions, if not zillions of gigabytes of information. It's a lot to process at once, and there's lots of different
Yeah.
questions you could ask it. And so what we've learned to do is put some agentic AI in there that allows people who are going to use the dashboard to talk in natural English to create a chart, or to create
Mm.
some sort of a trend that they want to show in one of their own slides. So they don't need to write the code; they just need to describe the problem. And that's really helped our clients, very quickly consume a lot more data than they would have otherwise. From the
Interesting.
perspective of human resources department here, who has employees with questions, um, you know, when you have 300 employees, you have at least, 4,000 questions throughout the year. The questions could be pretty typical, like, how do I find more information about my benefits, or really complex, like, how do I apply for state aid for disability? But a lot of those questions could be answered by a bot. And so what my team has been doing for the last 6 months is programming a custom GPT that will reply to the most frequently asked questions, so they won't need to wait around to be answered by us. And
Hmm.
so we effectively think we've probably taken 40 to 80 hours a month out of responding to the most common questions, when a people chatbot could do just as well.
Wow. So that's clearly one thing that's saved a lot of time. Are there any other automations or AI agents maybe that you guys have built that have really made a big impact internally or even externally?
Yeah, we talked about the people bot internally. I think externally, our AI that outbounds for our open roles, where it's
Mm.
targeting people based on their LinkedIn profiles and based on their other available data that's out there, and sending them emails. That is taking the need for a frontline recruiter or two kind of right off the list. The machine's doing it all. Now, again, when the data comes back, the senior recruiter is still responsible for kind of sorting the good from the bad, but at least the front end of the funnel is automated.
So it's sort of the human in the loop aspect that
Yes.
needs to stay in place. I see.
Yeah. And, I think that's partly because we all want to know how it's making its decisions. I think also because the human loop slows it down enough so that we can take time to do analysis and make decisions.
Hmm.
Without the human in the loop, we'd be looking at the very end of the process and a result maybe that we weren't anticipating because we didn't intervene when it was going on.
Hmm. Yeah. I think it I find it so interesting how like I'm sure AI could handle things on its own, but we have that need to ensure that it's doing what we think it's doing. Because there's still that possibility it'll hallucinate, it'll like do something weird,
Yep.
and then things can get out of control, and then what are you gonna do?
Yep.
Blame the AI?
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
why the human in the loop is so important, for sure.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it can't make us more efficient along the way.
100%. So as you guys scale, what's been like, I guess, have there been any like internal bottlenecks with people, tech, or processes that you've been noticed come up?
So we've been growing a lot through M&A, and which is really interesting because you actually have these bursts of growth both in
Mhm.
product and in revenue and in employees. And we've acquired 5 firms this year. And one of the things I
Wow.
think that is hardest about that is we can ingest them, we can get them started on working on our values, on kind of our new roles. The technology doesn't come together in a magical way. We need people who are going to integrate their tech with our tech. And so doing 5 acquisitions within 8 or 9 months, there's a lot of technical debt that needs to be built for these products to talk to one another. And I think it's easy to underestimate how much of lift is going to be needed to do that. And that's the promise of the acquisition, is these things are going to work great together, but the reality of getting them integrated can be very hard.
Hmm. That's interesting. Is there also any challenge with like the people aspect of mergers and acquisitions. I'm not super familiar with the process, but I imagine like cultures and like I don't know, different people's sense of operations and everything
Yeah.
it might not merge that seamlessly.
Yeah, there's a lot of people challenges involved with mergers and acquisitions. In general, um, my experience has been when companies are of similar sizes coming together, there's less of that cultural struggle. But when one is the megalithic dominant culture and the other one has its own culture, but it's small and scrappy, um, those are a little harder. But I will tell you that we've been pretty successful actually bringing the leaders of both the acquired organization and the acquiring organization together for a couple of days at a time at the very beginning to start to talk about the future and how they'll fit together and getting those leaders aligned in the same room not just helps them, but the people seeing them all together harmoniously helps the rest of us try to integrate too.
Okay. That makes sense. Um, so then what do you feel is working really well right now? And then where do you see things going for Crisp in the next, I don't know, 12 months, two
Yeah.
years?
Um, so I think what's working is we're growing very quickly, both because of acquisitions as well as organic hiring, net new headcount. And that quick growth has been a really good test for the systems that we've built to train people, onboard people, automate payroll, automate retirement planning. And so I think we built the system such that we're ready to scale probably behind 6, 7, 800 people. I think the challenge is making sure that the process is still documented, and when things break, we figure out why. It's never a set and forget it machine. There's a lot of things you can do to keep it running well, but just to think that you can push a button and walk away, it's very, very rare that processes that involve people can be left unattended.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So also then, like, I mean, you guys are growing at a rapid pace. So what are some challenges maybe you didn't foresee as things started growing, or something like someone who was in a position you guys were maybe a year ago should maybe like look out for and has
Yeah.
some foresight into?
Yeah, I think that what's interesting is, one of the hardest things we purchased two different companies in the UK this year, and we wanted to keep all these companies, companies separate for a little while before we integrated them. But these two were in the exact same city, and they all knew each other.
Wow.
And so, in bringing them on board, we tried to keep this kind of false wall between the two businesses because they were fairly different, but all the people knew each other. And so it very quickly became, one garbled, I guess, organization. So I think if there's advice in there, it's either to be very transparent that we want to keep these two entities separate, or
Mhm.
be very transparent that we're going to do our very best to integrate these two things, but to not announce your intention and then to not showcase what's happening provides people with the opportunity to say, I'm not quite so sure that that circus is my circus.
I see. Okay. So just basically stating the intention is
Be,
super important.
be transparent with that intention. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And then from the more operational standpoint, I imagine a lot of things came up as you're growing. And then I guess there's always that, like, do we just move as fast as possible and clean up our mess along the way and, like,
Hmm.
look back in a bit and see what kind of fell along the way? Or do we try and build our more sustainable foundation and then grow? Like, how do you see
Yeah.
that scaling happen?
So I don't think you can actually um, you can succeed at either end of that, which is the laissez faire. We'll just build it as we go because, we're not sure what's coming, or the more regimented, we have to shape this whole thing as it grows and constrain it for it to be correct. It has to be in between, which
Right.
is, we're going to build the most urgent things that are needed for now. We're not going to build them to the, 90th percentile, but they'll work for a bit. And then we're going to go build the things that are a little bit more strategic, that take longer to build, such that when it's ready, we can take people off the things that were temporary. It's that transition planning. It's building a little bit now and then buying yourself some time with that build so you can then build farther into the future.
I see. So kind of, yeah, like taking the fires that are really urgent, putting those out, and then leaving a little bit of fire so you can focus on the not urgent but important kind of stuff.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Because we all can say, oh, we can ignore the urgent. Well, when the urgent is the important, it can't be ignored.
Yeah.
At the same time, if we're dealing with the urgent that is not important at all, that's just taking our attention away from the things that really need to be fixed.
What are some things you think most companies or businesses could benefit from implementing internally that would really help just make things feel a lot easier, smoother,
Yeah.
take some headaches away?
Um, I think having really good meeting cadence with either your employees or your teams that you're leading, and by a good cadence, I mean it happens. You could set a clock by it on Monday mornings at 9, and another one Fridays at 4. And
Mm.
it's how do we open up the week? How do we summarize the week? So there's really good, book at a time communication throughout the week. I think sometimes without intentional communications cadences, we can feel a little isolated, especially if most of us are remote.
Yeah, that's true. The remote aspect has been really not challenging, but it's posed a lot of new things in the past couple years. I guess from the automation perspective, any one thing that you feel people should really look in like invest into building?
Most of it I've seen being built. So things like starting to automate the performance review process, these things are starting to come through again. Wanting a human in the loop is the biggest, watch out there. But I do think those systems are going to launch in the next little while. Um, but I think things like benefits administration, approving claims, submitting claims, I think that's all going to be automated within the next 12 months. I don't think a benefits specialist is much going to exist beyond the next 12 months.
Okay, so then what's
So
a big challenge that you're chewing on right now? Like what's really uh the thing on top of mind right now?
yeah, I really do think it's how do I create seasoned professionals who have experience beyond, their 1 or 2 years in the business so that they could take on the bigger challenges. And I think it
Mm.
means, looking for people who are great learners while you're hiring them to do the job you're hiring them to do, because you're going to need them to grow.
Mm.
I also think it means, committing to regular feedback with that person. It's coaching well can be really intense.
Mhm. What does a great learner look like to you? How do you spot one?
So super curious, both, why was it the right answer and why was it the wrong answer? Very interested in feedback such that you think they almost don't feel it. It's
Mm.
almost like robotic to them because it says left and they say how far left. You say right, they say how far right. And so people who take feedback and action very quickly. The other thing I would say is people who are a little bit humble. That they're uh, they know they're striving a little bit and they know they're reaching for more, but their ego's not going to get in the way of them continuing to learn.
Mm. And then in the training process, how do you make it not feel like micromanaging? Because I'm assuming even from a psychology perspective, shorter feedback loops improve learning.
Hmm.
As same with reviews, like if you do a once a year review, it's very difficult to tie that review to your actual performance when it happens, and it's harder to
Right.
internalize the lesson. Whereas, like,
Yeah.
of course, if you burn your hand and it hurts, you're gonna learn to not touch the stove again.
Pretty
But if you
immediately.
burn your
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if you burn your hand a year later, you're not gonna remember it was the stove necessarily.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of balance that? So it's not like super micromanaging necessarily, but you're still helping make sure that that learning process is there.
Yeah. This is a big question of empowerment. And I think the answer should be, we tell them what outcome we're looking for, not how to achieve the outcome.
Okay.
Um, so it gives them a target to shoot for, but it doesn't involve you telling them how to do it or how to get there. Now, someone with experience is probably going to come up with a great plan for getting there and not need much input. Someone with a little less experience might have a harder time coming up with a plan. And as they share it with you, it might be an opportunity for feedback. But the idea is to, give them the goal without telling them how. It's the telling them how that most people feel very micromanaged by.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess the autonomy of taking ownership of the task. And then I guess at the same time, you have to make sure people don't feel pressure to get it wrong because
Hmm.
that's going to hinder their creativity and, problem
But if
solving.
but if they are open to feedback when they get it wrong, they can probably get it right the second time.
Of course, yeah. I mean, in some cases, I think some environments make it feel a little scary to make the wrong move.
Yeah,
If your
definitely.
feedback sounds more like, you know, maybe you're getting fired. If you, but yeah, I think that's really important. So then is there anything you're super excited about that's coming up?
Yeah, I really can't wait for some of the agentic AI that can start like doing things for people. So instead of, where is the form so I could submit my insurance claim, it's submit my insurance claim, or
Mm-hmm.
instead of, help me identify 3 leadership training videos, instead of, help me become a better leader.
Hmm.
And so, the idea that I can ask more directly for the thing that I want, I don't have to translate it because, the LLM, the model will get it translated and find the thing I need.
Yeah. And then that's making me wonder how that's going to impact further the entry level position
Yeah,
gap
there it
that we
is.
just
Yep.
discussed.
It comes back to it, doesn't it? I think it's a
Yeah.
real issue. I'm sure we'll figure a way out of it, but it's one of the things keeping me up at night for sure.
Yeah, it's like you need to create a separate training ground from the job itself in order to create the necessary intuition and, I guess, problem solving
Yep.
thinking.
All
Hmm.
the things, right? And it actually takes pretty intensive coaching, you
Yeah.
know?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of reminding me of like school. When I studied architecture in first year, they forced us to do everything manually at first. They're
Mhm.
like, you're not allowed to touch a computer. You're not allowed to use AutoCAD. You're not allowed to use like any 3D modeling software. Everything's by hand. And then we're like, oh my God.
Yep.
And then that really forces you to understand what you're doing in a different way.
Yep.
And maybe that's necessary. I don't know. Maybe we have to force a little bit of technology regression in order to
Yeah.
improve the learning.
I
Hmm.
think so. And I do know it needs to be intentional. It can't be accidental.
Yeah.
Learning used to be able to be, fully, I guess, engulfed by over the course of 3 or 4 years doing this entry level job. I'll just be exposed to enough things accidentally that I'll have learned all the things. Well, if you try to compress that learning into 3 months or 6 months and you're focusing just on coaching one person, you have to decide for these 30 days, we're going to work on X as a skill.
Yeah.
And the next 30 days, we're going to work on Y. Because if we just
Hmm.
leave it to what accidentally happens, there's not nearly enough time to get this person ready.
Yeah. And I guess you also have to have pretty clear idea of what success looks like.
Very
Have
much.
they actually learned? How do I know that they've learned? How do I know that they're able to move on to the next phase of learning and that there's no gaps that have been left behind? Hmm.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's hard because that changes given, the role someone's in, given the company they're working for, given the industry they're in. So, that metric can change at any time, which makes it hard as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's a solution. I guess this you're probably one of the first people I met who's really posed this problem to me. So I think it's really interesting to think
Yeah.
about.
In my life, probably the most practical component of this is everyone that's working for me on my front line. Um, I'm trying to get them senior in their specialty before they need it. So whether it's
Mhm.
my head of recruiting, and I'm trying to get her, ready for being a director role before she needs to be there, or whether that's my senior manager of IT, each of them have very specific learning needs that are going to help them get to the next level. It's us focusing on them together that moves them forward.
Hmm. And really quick, what would be the roles you see being threatened the most based on the trends you're noticing?
Yeah, human resource specialist, hard one. I think it's going to turn into a people bot for the most part. I would also say compensation and benefits analyst within HR would be a hard one too because it's very frontline. I mean, if we go into marketing, all of the content, social and posting, all of that's automated already. And
Hmm.
so the frontline, marketing comms manager or SEO marketing specialist are going to be pretty much automated. You
Yeah.
get into finance. Accounting tends to be pretty easy for computers to do. So I'd be really curious if a frontline accountant is necessary, or if we need a senior accountant or someone above that level.
Right. Okay. So essentially data analytic type of roles that are not tied to strategic decision and
Yep.
more just computation, and
Yep.
then any manual like I think posting content, for example, would be different than um coming up with a strategy and like recording, because like
Yeah.
AI generated content is not necessary. Like I don't know anyone that actually consumes good AI generated content is happy to. Like it's against my will that I see this on my feed. It's
it will keep getting better though.
yeah, but I think also people have this sort of like resistance to enjoying it. Like they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, it's made by AI." Like it's not, you know what I mean?
Yes, it's not
There's
real. I
it's
can't
kind
take
of
it
fun.
serious. Yeah.
Yeah,
But again, AI is only going to get better. It'll be harder and harder to know
of
what is
course.
and what isn't real.
Yeah, I think yeah, the creativity aspect's gonna be interesting, how AI
Yeah.
can have how much creativity it can have,
Right.
essentially.
Right. If it
But
can write its own story or write its own melody, you know.
yeah.
So it can do a poem, but can it do a melody? I don't know.
Yeah, and then I think what I've noticed is a bit frustrating, not frustrating, but kind of interesting is if you use AI to try to solve a problem, it
Hmm.
almost feels like it's considered all of the options, it presents you with its solution, and then it feels like it's very final. There's like a
Yep.
finality to its conclusion. Whereas you might, if you just took a few minutes and consider the problem, you might come up with a better answer than the one it gave
Yeah.
you. And
Yeah.
you provide, and it's like, oh, that's a great idea. So I think it's it almost feels like, oh, well, it considered everything, therefore this answer it gave must be the best answer. But then
Right.
there's a layer of extra maybe problem solving or creativity or context awareness that it doesn't
Yep.
have at
Yep.
currently
Yeah.
that still makes it, yeah, a little harder to rely on.
But back to having the human in the loop,
Exactly. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So it's great. Well, it's such an interesting time for all things people and all things podcasting. You know, AI is a very fresh and normal topic, and I'm excited for what's to come for the human resources industry. But also,
Mhm.
just as a psychologist, very curious to see how people are going to learn and adapt.
Yeah. Yeah. And also where the guardrails for AI will be put up. Like where are
Yeah.
we setting the limit where it's like
Right.
we could use it, but maybe it's not the best course of action.
Yeah, and the nuclear attack codes would be one of those, right?
Hope so.
Yeah. But there's only two things that are consistent. Change, things will always change, and um, adaptation. People will always adapt. So
Mhm.
I know it's going to look bleak on the job I want or the job that I had isn't available anymore. There's going to be new jobs. There's going to be new problems
100%.
to solve. So we just have to trust that that's the way things go.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the conversation today. It was
This was
super
so much fun,
interesting.
Christina. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure having you on, and thanks for coming on today.